It is a truly historical achievement when a film is still being looked for inspiration or even franchise building over half a century later. Every filmmaker dreams of such a film. And no greater example of an everlasting film can be made than with Toho Pictures' 1954 monster masterpiece, Godzilla, otherwise known as... Welcome everyone. As many old viewers know, I'm quite fond of films, from doing countless review of many newly released and even classic films on the channel, to watching hours of behind-the-scenes documentaries and video essays on YouTube, and yada yada yada. Film had always pretty much been a big part of my life. Yet I've always had dreams of doing bigger projects on this channel, especially for the review series, to do docu-like kind of videos, especially from some of my favorite creators like Chris Stuckman or Films and Stuff. And now with Godzilla vs. Kong coming out to the big screen this summer, what better time to have a look back on these silver screen titans and their impact on film and culture as a whole, starting with the film that pioneered the kaiju genre itself. Before we begin to explore the history of the film, let us first go back to explore the inspiration behind the kaiju classic, and to do that we must go back in time. All the way back to 1954. Japan was still struggling after the end of World War II. The imperial government had collapsed, millions were still looking for basic resources and work in a post-war Japan, and millions were still recovering from the many bombing raids that occurred during the war, most notably from the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only two nuclear weapons dropped to date. However, most Japanese citizens were not aware of the horrific effects of the atomic bombings, as the US government were still enforcing censorship on most reports. Many were furious and distrustful over the US's attempt to hide the fate of their fellow countrymen, and conflict reached to a boiling point in 1954 when the US government conducted the first nuclear tests of Operation Castle in the Marshall Islands. At the same time, a Japanese tuna fisherman crew was passing by in search of tuna, getting caught in the blast. After the reports had come out on the crew known as the Lucky Dragon No. 5, who would tragically die by one from the wounds months later, uproar and protests began to spread across the country, old and young alike. The Japanese public had had enough of the abuse and irresponsibility of the American government. From marches to documentaries on the effects of the nuclear fallout, every part of Japanese life was involved in the movement. Japan was leading the anti-war movement, and the world had taken notice, especially an upcoming film producer from Tokyo. Tomoyuki Tanaka had been a producer for Toho Studios for 14 years. Tanaka had mostly been producing drama and action films that were mainly national hits. However, when the Lucky Dragon No. 5 incident took place, nobody could get their attention away from the national tensions against the American war machine. However, as the uproar was ongoing, producer Tanaka began to focus not so much on the incident itself, but the Cold War era as a whole. The arms race where the global superpowers of the USA and the USSR were creating more and more weapons of mass destruction like no man could ever possibly have imagined. Tanaka and the crew at Toho Studios would begin to realize that the fear of nuclear war was not just something shared in Japan, but with all of humanity, with the American and Soviet military not being the only ones capable of such weapons. The monster would go through many designs before becoming the iconic nuclear beast. One of the many standout designs were a concept of a combined gorilla and a whale creature, or as known in Japanese as Gorira and Kujira. This is where the iconic name was born when combining the two animal names in the Japanese, creating the name of Gojira. However, when the iconic design was chosen, the original plan was to film the monster in stop motion, similar to one of the film's biggest influences, 1933's King Kong. However, during early production, it became increasingly obvious how expensive and difficult it would be to achieve a convincing stop-motion monster, even with the big budget and crew. All these factors came in to decide the crew to go for the iconic suit, which would be worn by legendary kaiju actor Haruo Nakajima. This single decision could practically be the very birth of the kaiju film genre. However, despite its known benefit to help cut costs when making monster films, the journey to achieving this process was quite challenging for these movie pioneers. Despite its known benefits to help cut costs when making monster films, the journey to achieving this process was quite a challenge for these movie pioneers. Most of the monster suits made for kaiju films had famously been made of suits of rubber. However, in a post-war Japan where food was scarce, for many, To find basic rubber materials was the equivalent to finding gold. So Toho Pictures had to come up with a suit made out of materials which were readily made, landing on a ready-mix concrete suit. If the name did not give away the insane weight of the suit, the 100-kilogram weight will do it. Haruo Nakajima would be forced to work in a 100-kilogram suit for 6 months on set, with a suit so sensitive that it was boiling hot on contact due to the studio lights. However, these brutal conditions bred opportunity, with the suit forcing the team to get creative and find ways to still make the suit seem menacing. An example is how the iconic scales were actually used to cover the giant hole which allowed the actor to enter the giant suit. It was a challenging 6 months, to put it nicely. But big risks bring big rewards, and Tanaka's new film would prove the saying true once more by challenging the world overnight. In 1954, Gojira would premiere across Japan. Film and culture had changed overnight. From the earth-shattering special effects, the outstanding cinematography, the politically charged and thought-provoking dialogue, strong performances, and the scenes of destruction from fire and radiation of the monster as a metaphor of the atomic bombings of Japan in World War II have stuck with audiences forever. With the film grossing $2.25 million American dollars during its original run, making it one of the most successful Japanese films of the year, with the rest of the world laying their eyes on the King of Monsters very soon. It has been 66 years since the release of Toho's first kaiju film. Since then, Godzilla has starred in 35 films, multiple TV shows, multiple video games, and made over $2 billion in its box office history, and now with Kong vs. Godzilla coming this summer, having one of the biggest cinematic crossovers since, well, the last King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962. And with the continuous revival of the character from Toho and American studios such as Warner Brothers, and the everlasting commentary on nuclear warfare and environmental preservation, it is without doubt that Godzilla's influence will ever go away. With more sequels and reboots to come, the King of Monsters will continue to rule all over movie monsters, as he has been since 1954.